My name is Marguerite Ross, and this is just a few things that I remember about my 8 weeks in Northern Ireland when there was still a lot of the troubles going on. I remember the phone call asking me to come and start the school year for the little church school near Enniskillen. I knew nothing about the word Enniskillen, except it was a place. But I agreed to come to start the school year. And about 2 weeks before I was to leave, I heard on the news that the largest bomb which had ever gotten across the border from the Republic into Northern Ireland had been confiscated because the cart which was carrying it had bogged down in a wet field. And it was destined for Enniskillen. I had already determined not to fly to Enniskillen, but to fly into Shannon, because I had friends in Shannon. I had taught there 2 years before. So I knew I wasn't flying into Enniskillen. What I didn't know was that Enniskillen was a huge British Army base. No wonder they had this huge bomb destined for Enniskillen. Actually, the school and the church and the pastor's residence were all in a large old manor house, and they weren't in Enniskillen. They were about 11 miles from there. So one of the church members from Shannon drove me up to Galway, and there I was met by Pastor Clark, who took me then all the way to Enniskillen, or to where the church and the school were. I noticed that the British soldiers who were on patrol duty were never, not even 2 together, always 4. And the fellow who was the last in line would have a glance behind him every now and then. I have your back had real meaning. When they flew helicopters for observing what was going on down below, never one by itself, always 2. And if you drove anywhere at night, you would see a circle, a red circle made by a flashlight with red and circled around. That meant stop. And as I was never the driver, I was not interrogated, but the driver was. And while he was being interrogated, I could look out and see in the ditch beside me somebody looking up to check underneath the car, and somebody in the tree higher up checking down, looking down to see what was going on. And one day, the pastor said to me, Did you notice something outside your schoolroom window a while ago? And I said, no, I didn't happen to be looking out that way. What was a British soldier with his gun at the ready? He was watching the road that was coming in. And there was another one on the other side watching the road coming in that way. And his two buddies were shooting baskets with the kids, basketball hoop and whatnot. And one day I wanted to go into Enniskillen to make a purchase which an Irish friend in the United States had asked me to make. And the pastor said, well, I think you can find it in such a place. Why don't you go with me? I need to go to the bank, and you can stay in the car when I'm in the bank, and I'll stay in the car while you go in the shop for your purchase. And I wondered about that. But as we approached the town center, I saw a huge billboard that said, no vehicle may be left unattended in this area. Then I understood what that was all about. Well, we had a safe time. We enjoyed starting school. I think I had 6 grades, 5 or 6 grades, but I had taught one teacher school before, years before, and I got that organized after a fashion, and some things we could do together and some things we had to do separately, but we managed, and we had school. One day the children wanted to go for a little walk, and so I took them for a walk. And I happened to see some mushrooms, shaggy mane mushrooms. And I had taught a unit in science class for 6th graders a number of years about mushrooms. And so I recognized them immediately. And I told the children they were one of the foolproof 4 that's safe to eat, that you can't get mixed up with. And I told them the characteristics. The following Sabbath, we were having kind of a little church picnic, and one of the ladies came up to me and she said, my children tell me that you say these mushrooms, and she pointed to a little group of shaggy mane mushrooms which happened to be there, and she said, they tell me that you say these are safe to eat. Is that true? And I said, yes. And I pointed out to her what the characteristics. And she said, would you eat one? And I said, yes. And she said, now? And I said, yes. And I picked one and ate it. But I reminded her she must not save them till tomorrow, because she said, oh, I love them, and I want to pick some and take them home. I said, you must eat them tonight, because they are a member of the inky cap family, and by tomorrow they will be a gluey mess. So tonight you must eat them. Well, we enjoyed our time together. Northern Ireland, in spite of all the troubles. But the pastor told me just when I was leaving, do you realize there were 5 sectarian killings this past week? when I heard about that bomb that was stopped before it got to Enniskillen, I said to the Lord, if I'm going on your business, please make it also your business to take care of me. And he did. And I'm grateful for that. And I was asked to tell you something about what I have observed about children, the relationship of how they are when they're children in school and what they grow up to be. And I'd like to start with their potential that seems likely. And I'm thinking particularly of those eager learners. Oh, you know they're going to do something memorable, definite, because that's the kind that they are. And I'm thinking of one young lad. Oh, he had come from the mission field, and this was one of his first experiences, I think, in a big school. But he was such an eager learner. He wanted to know everything that's going on, and he would investigate, and he would do research, and he would find out. And so you know, something special he's going to grow up to be, because he's already special. And he did. He is now the academic dean in one of the American Adventist universities. I'm thinking of another one who was also a very eager learner. Oh, he was so interested in history. Oh my, he wanted to do all kinds. I remember how intrigued he was when I read something to the class from the French national epic, the Song of Roland, because it describes so graphically warfare in the Middle Ages and what happens to the warrior and so on. And he grew up to be an expert in Middle Eastern languages, all that sort of thing. When I saw him, must have been 30 at least years later, he could tell me. He said, I suppose you've noticed that I've been watching you. Well, I hadn't, because I'd been very busy that Sabbath morning with what was going on at church. But he finally said, you remind me of my 6th grade teacher. And he told me his name, and I knew instantly who he was. And I said, I am your 6th grade teacher. And then he was surprised. But it's true. I knew immediately when he said his name who he was. I didn't recognize him, of course. But then he could tell me what he'd been doing all those 30 years. And I'm thinking of another one when I think about a responsible person. Those 2 boys I had in 6th grade. But this one, whom I remember as being so responsible, he was a 4th grader. And not only was he responsible, but the children accepted him without naming it or perhaps being too much aware they accepted him as a leader. And sometimes when I would go with them to their music class, because the music teacher taught in the academy and had to come from there to the elementary school and might be late. And if he were, I would ask this young lad, will you start them, get them warmed up? And he would just get up and go up to the front and say, well, shall we do this? And they would respond to him. In fact, sometimes better to him than to an adult. They had that kind of respect for him. And one of the things we always had to do, if a fire drill was called, we never knew exactly what time of the day, but the teachers knew that there would be one that day. Always the register that had the names of every child and all their information had to be taken out. And once in a while, I might be down the hall getting something or whatever, and be out of the classroom. And if the fire drill signal came on, he knew where to get my register and take it, the first one out with the register. He was that responsible. He has grown up to be a specialist in nursing, and he is in charge of the nursing program in a large hospital. You would know that he was that kind of responsible boy, even in grade 4. And some, particularly I think of 6th graders, because that's what I taught most often for many years, 16 years straight, that they're aware of their own strengths and what they're likely to do. And I used to wish sometimes that we could have maybe a 4-week program where those who already knew what they were good at and wanted to do could go and work with an adult at part of the day. And I think of this one young lady who I asked her to take care of some papers and things for me. She was terrific at organizing them. And she went on to have a specialist's degree, which required that kind of organizational ability. I'm thinking of another one. She was a 7th grader at the time, but I asked her to come and check math papers for me. And I discovered that all on her own, she had taken the initiative. If a 6th grader was having trouble with math, she wrote a note and attached it to the math paper and said, why don't you ask so-and-so, another student in the class that she had observed was very good in math. Why don't you ask so-and-so to help you with this math? And she did that all on her own. Needless to say, she grew up to be a CPA and whatnot, but that she had the initiative to think how this child could be helped. Instead of saying, see your teacher about this, she said, see another classmate, which was good for both of them. And some are kind of unlikely, and you wonder, how will they turn out? I think of this was a older student as well, who disliked very much an adult that he had to deal with. And his bright idea was that if he could, or there were 2 or 3 other kids also involved with this adult, if he could, they could annoy him, the adult, enough to make him hit one of them, then they could sue him and get rid of him. What do you think he came to do as an adult? He's one of the persons responsible for running a big orphanage down in Central America. Vindictive people don't do well in that kind of job. So you see, something has happened to him, although he looked a bit unlikely at the time. And some are unsettled. They don't seem to know what they want to do or how to do it or how to get rid of the circumstances that are annoying them. I think of one young lad who was terribly unsettled. In fact, we had to send him to see Ruth Murdoch to find out what we could do to help him. And as usual, she was able to discover what was causing this and tell us how to help him. And he's grown up to be a very responsible pastor. And what else? Some are unready. I think of a young lad. He was in the lower grades at the time, but he was quite unready for the grade I had him in, due to some circumstances that he had no control over, and neither did I. So I tried to help him as much as I could to make up for what somehow he had missed getting to where he was. And he, later on in his life, became acquainted with another American who was working in Mexico. And they became so adept at working with each other that whenever his help was needed, it was called for. And he told me not long ago that he had made over 40 trips down there to help, because he found somebody with whom he could work so easily. It just happens, doesn't it, that 2 people sometimes can work very well together, where maybe neither of them work very well with somebody else, but it happens. And I think of what, over the years, they tell me sometimes what they remember about when they were youngsters in school. And I think about this young lady. She had had surgery, major surgery, when she was a child, had to have, because she was born with cleft palate. And years and years and years later, she told me that one of the boys in her class had said, well, so-and-so is prettier, but so-and-so is nicer. And the nicer one was not the pretty one. And she remembered that all those years. And I think of one that was told to me just about a month ago. She had a teacher who was not particularly attractive, but she had such a sweet, kind heart. And this young woman said to me, you know, one day she picked up the dictionary, the teacher did, and opened it and said, you know, this is a big book, like the big books in heaven. And I suppose she was talking to first, second graders. And she said, oh, let's see if Barbara's name is in it. And she opened and said, oh, yes, Barbara's name is here. Oh, but underneath it says, but she pulls her little brother's hair. Oh, I wonder if she can go to heaven. Oh, yes. Look, here beside her name is a drop of Jesus' blood. And it says she's forgiven, so she can go to heaven. And she's remembered that all her life. I think of another young man. He was an upper grader, who was one of my students. And in the spring of the year, something happened to him. He became quite almost surly, and I was careful how I spoke to him. And I happened to know another young man, older, who was a friend of his family. And I said, what has happened? What's going on? Oh, he said, I can tell you what happens. His father gets him up at 4 o'clock in the morning to go and do something on the farm. So I was very careful not to push him in any way or cause a confrontation or anything. And he's never forgotten that either. Children remember the little things that sometimes we don't even realize what an impact it has on their life. Like the little girl whose classmate said, so-and-so is prettier, but so-and-so is nicer. Love covers a multitude of faults, and inconsistencies and inabilities sometimes. That's what teachers need: patience, understanding, willingness to listen, and sometimes to tell by body language when the child does not have enough vocabulary, maybe, to even explain what it is that's troubling them. That one happened right after school, or after school while the little girl was waiting. She was a first grader, waiting for her father to come pick her up. And she was out on the playground, and I think she fell off. You know those merry-go-rounds that they pump to make it go around? I thought it was that she fell off of.
Did you ever?
She was sick to her stomach,
Okay.
as well as that her arm was hurt.
Were there ever any tornadoes? Or oh, you weren't finished. Sorry.
But I didn't realize that the break of a bone sometimes, perhaps because the nerve center that's so close to the stomach, what is it called? Solar plexus, something like that. You know, it's a nerve system that's close to the stomach that affects the stomach, makes them feel sick to their stomach. We were in gym class one day, 6th graders. I was not the gym teacher. We had a male gym teacher, but I was there with them. And I can't remember if it was the year before or 2 years before that the 7th and 8th graders had a baseball game. And one of the 7th graders, as he slid into home, knocked the catcher off his feet, and the catcher fell with his knee into the runner's stomach area. And they found something to carry him. I think it was a door or something. And they carried him to the medical center on campus, which was over in the student center. And we had a doctor who had just graduated from medical school, whatever, a new doctor, and she examined him and kept him overnight and called his mother that she could come and get him. And when she walked into the room where he was dead. He had a ruptured spleen from that knee, all that force hitting him. So it was about a year, maybe, or a year and a half later, not long, I was in the gym with the kids, and they were playing a ball game where they throw the ball at the runner's feet, and this little Filipino girl, very slight girl, she was running toward the stage, and she glanced behind her to see where, and she ran straight into the front of the stage, which hit her right in the middle, and she crumpled. And the gym teacher said, "Miss Ross, you better check her." And I picked her up and laid her up on the stage. You can't imagine I could do that, but in those days I could. And she kept saying, and I stayed right there with her, and she kept saying, "I'm thirsty, I need a drink, I'm thirsty." And I said, "Well, we'll try to get you one, Jim, as soon as we can." So when gym class was over, which wasn't long, I said to Lynn, "I think you better carry her down to the office," because we had a bed there in that area where we could leave, and call her father, who was a nurse. So he took it from there. And the father came, and being a nurse, he picked her up and he carried her out to the car and took her to the medical center. But see, it's the boy who died was over in the student center. But by that time we had the medical center, and he took her there. And the doctor was another Filipino, and everybody knew about this boy who had died. His father was was Dr. Kubo. It was the Kubo boy, the middle one who died. So everybody knew about that. And so Dr. Hedgenova said, "We will monitor her very carefully." I don't know if they took her right then over to the hospital to be monitored. And they did emergency surgery in the middle of the night. And she also had a ruptured spleen. Mm-hmm. But of course the kids wanted to know what all that meant, and so we had to do research on it, and we had to borrow the anatomical things to show them where it was, where it happened, and what caused it, and what the spleen is all about. I tell you, we learned a lot about spleens. Yeah, but because we knew about what had happened to him. Betty Trickett. The kids were going out to the playground. I can't remember if it was noon hour, must have been. I was finishing something in the classroom, and they went out. And I heard something happen in the hall, and the other teacher screamed, "Miss Ross, come." And this little girl, she was third grader, had run her hand through the glass door. You know, there's a panic bar on the door. And she hit for the panic bar, but she's looking around and missed it and went through the door. And there was a big piece of glass in her arm. And I took the glass out. She was cut like from here to here because she was a third grader. You know, that's not all that far. But she was cut right between these. I didn't know what to do, Kevin. But I knew that had to be closed. So I closed it with my two hands. And then, instead of calling for somebody to take her, we were in this building, and the door was toward the gym, and the medical center at that time was here in Nethery. And so I walked holding her into Nethery. But it was lunchtime, and the school nurse was home having lunch. So I stayed there with her, holding this closed. And they went and called her father, who had been a medic in World War II. He was in the business office down the hall. And he came, and he didn't know what to do or whatever. He didn't know anything. But by that time, they had gotten hold of the school nurse, and she came. And I'm still holding this closed. And the school nurse said to me, "Well, Mary, let your fingers go one at a time, and I'll put butterflies, those." And I knew it wouldn't hold, but by that time I was too much in shock to tell her it wouldn't hold. But I knew it wouldn't. But I couldn't talk. And the little girl, of course, was practically out. She was deeply in shock. So I did what she told me to do. I knew she'd see pretty soon. And sure enough, about the second one, she said, "That won't hold, will it?" And I said, so then she went and got a bandage and began wrapping it as I let my fingers go as she wrapped. And finally she got the whole thing, and the father was there, and she said to him, "We'll have to go to the emergency room in Niles." That was the closest. And we'll have to go. And he said, "Well, my car's an old clunker." And she said, "We'll take my car." And he said, "Well, my car's parked right out here." And I said, "Give me the keys. I'll park it." So, see, it was parked right out here. So he gave me his keys, and he picked the little girl up, and they left. And I went down, I drove his car over into the parking lot and left it there. I suppose I took the keys back to his office. I don't remember what I did. That was a long time ago. They took 32 stitches in that child's arm because they had to stitch inside first before they stitched outside. Yeah, she had that scar all the way. I am not medical in any way, but somehow the Lord helps you to know what to do or to do something. But we shouldn't have walked her over. We should have kept her right there until somebody could come. But I don't know if they would have had the supplies. But anyway, I was amazed that her father didn't figure out what to do. But maybe the supplies were locked up and he didn't have a key to get them or do something. I don't know.